I see it.
Okay, so I stopped here last time, and I think I got a little confused about the Huns. So I just want to clear some things up before we go on. The White Huns, they are not Altaic. That was a name given actually to some Pashtuns. That was because these Pashtuns from down here were fierce warriors, and people said, "Oh, you're like the Huns." So that was wrong. And there were White Huns and Red Huns, and that's just because of the dress that they wore. They spoke Persian, and interestingly enough, the dialect that they spoke was Bactrian. And their writing developed along Kushan lines. So the Kushans copied the Greek alphabet. And so all this kind of ties together. Another correction, that the Tajiks are not always Turkic. The Uzbeks are always Turkic. But the Tajiks speak a Western Iranian language. So Masood, Dr. Abdullah, they speak the similar language to the Pashtuns. And so obviously in Uzbekistan, the Mongol invasion erased everything, and everything became Turkic. And Uzbekistan, they're Turkic, but not so in Tajikistan. So there's a language difference between those two. The other thing I wanted to just underline is the Pamir Valley. We talked a lot about that. A couple of things became clearer as I was preparing. And this is where Tajiks live, right? So Tajikistan is right up here. It came up in the context of the Great Game. The Russians and the British had a standoff in the Pamir Valley. The Russians took it, but their treaty of understanding is they restored the Pamir Valley to Afghanistan. Now, there's a connection between that interesting appendage of Afghanistan and the road up to Kashgar through Pakistan. You'll remember this is the proposed railway that China is going to build through Pakistan. And this is another map of that existing highway that exists up to Kashgar. But look where the Pamir Valley ends. It ends right here. So the old Silk Road path through the Pamir Valley connected with the road from Taxila up to Kashgar. And this part of it was a common pathway where those two roads joined. I thought that was really interesting. And just to finish that point, I think Carol asked, what do you mean that road is going to the ocean? So this shows the new Silk Roads that China is proposing. And you can see from Kashgar, that road is going to go all the way down to the Arabian Sea down here at a port called Kwadar, which they've built. So this would be tremendous for Chinese shipping, particularly to Africa from Western China. That'd save a lot of transportation costs. Also, Shigeko last time asked about the Silk Road to Europe, and I said, no, it's a railway. And here's how the railway runs. And it goes first to Moscow and then over to Rotterdam. And of course, you can get to London once you're in the European rail system. I like this map. Again, here's that appendage of Afghanistan. And here is the river systems that work its way up. Kashgar would be over here, Pamir Mountains. And then the question was, well, wait a minute, where's Dunhuang? So I just kind of oriented myself to the easternmost part, Iko, which is Loup Nord. And how close is that to Dunhuang? So Google Maps from Dunhuang to Loup Nord is around 700 miles, curving around because of the desert.
Can you go back to the last map?
Yeah. This one?
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to know where Loup Nord was. Is that Loup Nord still part of China today?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it might be the Mongolian part. There's an independent Mongolia, and then there's a part that I think is Chinese, if I've got that right. So
that railway that goes through Pakistan, on the water, they're always running into pirates. But the thing is, what about the railway? Will there be robbers and all that kind of stuff that they have to?
I don't know. Attacks by Indian tribes? I don't know. I don't know that. It's an interesting thought. Terrorists could sure do a lot of damage, couldn't they?
Yeah.
I think Lawrence of Arabia, right? Railroads are very vulnerable. Long distance, hard to guard. And you only have to disrupt the rails and you've got big problems. So that's an interesting question. All right, so Urumqi is almost due north of Loup Nord, and there's Dunhuang where we were. All right, the steppes. Now, so much of the Silk Road has to do with the steppes, and we've mentioned it before. This is the punchline. This is the end of the story. When the Indo-Europeans started moving to the south, interrupting civilizations as we knew it, and to the west, influencing very slowly the map of Europe. This to the south was more military. To Europe was not quite as military. Why? Because there was no treasure in Europe at the time. It was a very backward place where civilizations had developed down here. And I just want to point out a few things. The Indo-European and the languages. Notice that the Semites are coming up from the south. They're in a totally different language group. Totally different language group. So that's an important point, as are the Chinese aren't even on this map. I'll touch on the Altaic in just a second. The other thing is the color of these arrows. The first wave of Indo-Europeans, the Mitanni coming down into the Fertile Crescent and disrupting things. And then another arrow going down into Greece. And I think these are the Myceneans. I've always had a hard time separating the Myceneans from Greek culture. And I think this earliest version was a more warlike Myceneans, and it was they that launched and fought the Trojan Wars that Homer later wrote about. Now, Homer himself was from a later arriving Greek wave of Indo-Europeans. And among this earlier wave that were very violent, the Assyrians and the Hittites, and their use of the horse, which I'll get to in just a second. Notice the Slavs. We're going to be spending some time talking about the Slavs in the coming week, given the situation in the Ukraine, as we talked about. As ever, maps are most instructive for me. But how do we get to this map? This is the end of the story. I want to start at the very beginning, just because when we talk later on about the Silk Road, you'll understand exactly how the Indo-Europeans evolved. So I'm going to talk about coming out of Africa. How's that for early enough? The land on this map is white, and the water is this darker color. So get used to that color code. And here's the Nile River in northern Africa. Here's modern day Turkey and the Black Sea and Crimea, Shigeko, sitting right here, very prominent. And so 45,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers wandered out of Africa. Now, their color is white. Just bear that in mind. This is color-coded. So hunter-gatherers, the most primitive, just finding food that's laying on the ground or chasing it through the forest. Hunter-gatherers. 45,000 years ago, they wandered out and they made it all the way to Europe, further north. But some of the earlier waves found the hunting and the gathering really good here in the Fertile Crescent, where you have the Tigris and the Euphrates. So they dropped off there and gathered and hunted. And then after 34,000 years of doing that, they tumbled into farming 11,000 years ago. And they were so successful at it that 8,000 years ago, some of them left and they wandered up towards Greece and into the steppes. This Yamnaya is another word for steppes, and we'll get to this in just a second. They split off. So some went to the steppes and became herders, and some went into Greece and Europe and became farmers. So this split 8,000 years ago, roughly. I'm rounding off, but I want to use rounded off simple numbers so we can keep things straight. So what's the next step? When they got to Europe, they found cultures, not civilizations. But when they got to Europe, they founded stone and pottery cultures. And this is before this is while the Yamnaya are still up in the steppes, learning to become herders. It takes them 3,000 years. So the branch that goes to Europe settles down and creates all these different cultures that have been classified along with what survived, which is mainly out of stone, right? And pottery, clay. rock that can survive. So archaeologists have made these categories. Now, the most famous one that we're all familiar with is the megalithic Atlantic culture, and this is Stonehenge. And all the stone lists that Iko and I saw up in the Orkney Islands as well. All throughout Scotland, you have these stone plaques sticking out of the ground. But Stonehenge, obviously, is the one we remember the most. But Iko and I saw in Ireland at Newgrange a cave that was built at the time of the pyramids that is lined up with the solar system. So it's very, very interesting. But out here on the steppes are the Yamnaya. Now, an abbreviation for them is Jamna. So we're dealing with a lot of words, but Yamnaya and Jamna are referred to the same group, and they're also Indo-European. So this is the Indo-European, and it's called Indo-European because they're going to get down to India eventually, as you will see. Just as the farmers spread up to Europe 8,000 years ago, the first civilizations are beginning to blossom, and they finally hit their stride 6,000 years ago in around three rivers: the Nile, the Mesopotamia, which is the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Indus River over here. Then 5,000 years ago, the Yamnaya, having spent 3,000 years, beginning 8,000 years ago, so 8,000, 3,000 years, 5,000 years ago, they, out of farming, figured out also how to do animal husbandry. And so that gave them the option of being nomadic herders. And what did they do with this new option? They started moving west with their animals 5,000 years ago. So now we're dealing with the second immigration. 8,000 years ago, the farmers went into Europe, and they're there peacefully farming. And now you have another group that after farming for a while became herders, and they migrate down into Europe. They're the Yamnaya, also known as Jama, and Indo-Europeans.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So the thing is, the farmers went in about 8,000 years ago. So, Europe was pretty boggy and a mess. Nothing considerable farmland. So when was it 8,000 years ago that land became farmable?
Well, you'll see that they hugged along the Mediterranean. So they didn't get up into the bogs that you had in Northern Europe, mainly along there, finding little dry patches.
But if they're herders, the Yamnaya, for them to go west to Europe, it seems like a bad choice.
Well, they went east too, and we'll get to that. I'm dealing with Europe first, okay? It takes 1,000 years for the Yamnaya to finish getting all the way to the British Islands. And you can see the DNA evidence for this. This is what's driving this. You can get DNA evidence, and the orange is the DNA from the folks that went to the steppes and developed herding. And you can see it's pretty high up north, interestingly enough. But the further you get down south, it's more farmers. It's more Neolithic farmers here. The other point I want to make is this is going to be the birthplace of Indo-European, but just remember, other languages are totally separate. I already pointed out the Semitic, the Chinese, also the Dravidian, and then the branch that walked through India and over island hopping to Australia. So those are totally different languages. So this is my summary slide. I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but 45,000 out of Africa, 11,000 they discover in the Fertile Crescent how to farm. 8,000 river civilizations develop in the Fertile Crescent. Also at that time, 8,000 years ago, the surplus farmers there, maybe they were surplus, who knows? They migrated north, splitting off one branch to Greece that became the farmers of Europe, and the other branch heading east to the steppes where they developed skills in animal husbandry. And there, 5,000 years ago, these herders took off to the west with their horses. And they found that the earlier farmers had created the stone and pottery culture. And 4,000 years ago, the migration finishes up in the British Isles. And I'll link that to what's going on in the Fertile Crescent. Back in the Fertile Crescent, Abraham in monotheism is evolving. And it may be that the Garden of Eden is the Tigris and the Euphrates Valley.
Johnny, could I ask you one question? If the people came from Africa, were they the Black Africans, or were they white or something?
Well, 45,000 years ago, they were Black. And the reason we know that is that not everybody left, right? And all the people that stayed and all their DNA has never left Africa are dark-skinned. So white skin is an evolution, an accommodation to less sun. To get vitamin D, you have to be able to absorb the sun, and that's probably why light skin developed as to make sure you got enough vitamin D. I'm sure there are other reasons, but I'm out of my depth. That's my superficial answer.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was
okay. So the division of early people into farmers and herders just reminded me of the musical Oklahoma, where you had this conflict between the cowboys and the farmers. And there's this one song in there that my dad used to play this all the time. And it really reflects a basic split in the evolution of humans, like we just saw. My Y chromosome was analyzed by National Geographic, and it shows my Y chromosome that makes me a male that doesn't change. I have the same Y chromosome that's gone back millennia. Went up to the steppes and came down and wound up in the British Islands. So I am a proud Yamnaya. I'm a child of the steppes. So this is how they've broken down the DNA in apportioning it to the farmers in the Yamnaya. It's interesting. In Europe, it's pretty much all farmers. And then for some reason, they start mating with the hunter-gatherers who had first come out of Africa and were there hunting and gathering. These Neolithic farmers, they had evolved in the Fertile Crescent. They came up, started farming, and you had hunters and gatherers. They had to encounter each other, and they did, and they shared DNA. So then the Yamnaya arrive, and this is all from a National Geographic article that speculates that one reason that they survived is they had some resistance to the plague. So it might have been why they did so well. So this is to your point, Aiko, about why did they go west? Well, they also went east at about the same time. We're going to learn a little bit later on that this southeast branch that heads down towards China is going to be the Kushans. They're going to be the last of the Indo-Europeans to come down from the steppes. And they're going to be replaced by the Altaic people. Now, the Altaic people are mentioned on this map. Here's the Altaic people way, way up here, and they split off very early. So they were somehow part of this wave out of Africa, but they split off so early. Their language is so distinct. That there's no connection whatsoever.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Go back to that map. I wonder if the Yamnaya did so well going east compared to going west, or did they? Because the thing is, they were animal husbandry people. You can see going east, there's all that grassland of the steppes. And is that why Asia has so many people?
Well, Asia has so many people for a lot of reasons. But in terms of the migrations to the east, there's one theory that the Huns started attacking and heading back towards the west around 500 AD, because they were the ones that finally reached the easy, low-hanging fruit of the steppes. And once the steppes to the east had been exhausted, they turned around and said, well, this isn't as good as it used to be. Let's head west. That's one theory, and it kind of fits nicely with your question. So thanks for asking it. All right, onward we go. So this gets you back to the punchline, right? This is the punchline, and this is how we get to 5,000 years ago. And the other ways that they left the steppes. We've already talked about their path into Europe and up into the British Isles, but they went south too, and the earlier waves, as I discussed earlier, much darker arrows. This is the first wave, and they were pretty aggressive people, the Myceneans, the Assyrians, etc. And then the very interesting couple that we're going to get into First of all, is the Persians and when they came down. So this is where the Persian story is going to start when we get to the Persians next week. And then the Aryans who go down into India and introduce their Indo-European language into India. And it replaces the Dravidian that had been the native language. So, and the Indus River civilization was what they were attracted to. And very early Aryan prayers are the so-called Vedas. And the Vedas are part of Hindu religion. So not only do they introduce language, but they introduce their concept of the supernatural from coming down from the steppes.
Now, Frankopan mentions that there was a climate change occurring in the steppes. When did that occur relative to all of this?
I think they mention it. From 1500 to 1000. So the question is, if that's when the drought and overpopulation forced migration, why did the earlier migrations come, and why were they more violent, the Myceneans and the Assyrians? Well, the Iron Age was just beginning to dawn, so there was an upgrade in weapons, and you're going to see that the militarization of the horse made a big step with chariot warfare. So because there was clear advantages to fighting, you could a stronger power that had iron and chariots could win. Maybe that explains the earlier. But certainly later, the second wave, which is in this red color, is more drought. Okay, just a review of the Indo-European language. It starts here in the area of Turkmenistan today, and it evolved to all these different Indo-European languages, which remarkably covers northern India. The only surviving Dravidian language is spoken in the south of India. And that's because the penetration of that area was incomplete. And we see the Slavic languages spreading up this way. This is the Russian influence that we talked about in the history of Russia as they closed off the steppes. But the Altaic languages are still spoken in these crosshatched areas.
You know what? One thing, the Dravidians are dark. They're dark people, and that was that one wave that went down to India.
Right.
And they don't need, they can stay dark because it's warm. You don't have to lighten up to get more sun.
Yep. That fits with the previous theory.
Yeah.
So now I want to talk about the horse. The horse is really important for the steppes. And the evidence is that the horse was developed 6,000 years ago on the western steppe north of the Caspian Sea, and quite near what's in the news today, the Ukraine. But it went all the way to Kazakhstan, where the horse first appeared. It was initially treasured for food, right? but you have all these cave paintings with horses on it. So maybe they recognized early on that this horse could be something other than food. So by 4,000 years ago, they developed ways to use the horse to pull their goods, which would make them more mobile. They could carry their homes, they could become truly nomadic and follow the best grazing area with their animals. But hitching the horse to a wheeled vehicle was first discovered in Mesopotamia, along with these other modifications of the wheel, and turned the horse into a weapon. So by 1500 BCE, you have the Aryans coming down into the Indus Valley and changing the history of the Indus Valley right up through today. Hinduism, the Vedas, the caste system. You can imagine the Brahmins were all Aryans. There have been some archaeology digs in Turkmenistan looking at possible first settlements, big settlements there. We won't spend any time on that. But this is useful just to look at the timing of the different waves of Indo-Europeans a little bit more finely than I was able to look at it earlier. So we had these 6 waves, and the most recent wave was the one to India. And there were a couple into the Mediterranean, as you can see. Barbara's joining us. McNeil says that men learned how to ride horseback habitually about 900. So up to this point, it has just been hitching them to a chariot. Nobody could master getting on their back. But around 900 on the steppes, they figured out how to get the horse to tolerate you being on the back. I love this book. This is a book I read to my grandkids. And there's a fun fact in here. I'll ask you guys. What hoofed animal submitted to bareback riding 3,000 years before the horse did? This is a trick question, and it's really fun. Reindeer. There's evidence the northern Mongolian people rode their reindeers. Now, this is also from McNeil, and it shows, Aiko, that the Yamnaya headed first, to the west. Actually, not first. We're not 100% sure about the dates here. The more recent map that we just looked at, I think, gives more precise dates, but it doesn't matter. And they had to the east as well, getting all the low-hanging fruit by 500. So the Huns figured to turn around and head back. Obviously, that's a gross generalization. But in terms of understanding the major forces of history, I think it's useful to think of it in these terms. And this is the rise of the West. Both Ramsay and I read this in the late 60s and 70s. This is my original copy. There's a new copy, Shigeko, if you want to get it. Barbara, if you want to get it. And what he talks a lot about is the steppe gradient. And think of it as a conveyor belt. When there was steppe warfare, they'd come and they'd raid and take back booty. But over periods of time, they'd set up an empire and negotiate. This one shows a Chinese city to the east. And they would come and gather tribute, and the Chinese would pay them off for police protection, if you will, a real protection racket. A few words about the pastoral way of life and the lifestyle. There is clearly an admiration for individual prowess, and the alpha male became the authority. There was a high reward for horsemanship, as you'll see in just a few minutes. What kind of horsemanship? And always there was what was called the Iranian Aperture, which is going to be very important for the Persian people. The Iranian Aperture was one of the easiest ways to head south to the great treasures of civilization, which had been developed in the river civilizations. And in fact, it was the Assyrians, who themselves were warlike, that were the victim of the Scythians, and overthrew the Assyrians, which left a vacuum for the Persians. So you can argue that the Iranian Aperture created Persia, or made Persia possible. But Persia continued to be vulnerable, and we're going to see that they developed some technology to protect themselves against the horsemen from the steppes. Alas, Cyrus, the most famous Persian of them all, was killed by steppe raiders. He went forth to parry them and paid with his life.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Yamnayas were the first people that emerged from Africa and went in two different directions. So
no. The Yamnaya were a later branch of the first people, the hunter-gatherers that came out of Africa.
Okay, but would the Huns, the Turks, the Altaic people, are they do they have the Yamnaya genes?
Well, that's why I spent so long with that on that detailed map. The first separation of the Yamnaya were the Altaic. They split off. That arrow shows them splitting off very early. So I guess the point is they're not totally independent from the Yamnaya like the Semites were in the south. But it was so early that we should consider them a completely separate language group. There's no similarities between the Altaic language and Indo-European language. And I think language is important for understanding and avoiding warfare, and that has an impact later on. You'll remember last week I was responding to the question of whether the Navajo language had any resemblance to the Altaic. And as I went down that rabbit hole, I learned that after 5,000 years, there's zero connections between languages that originally broke from a common ancestor. More than 5,000 years ago, the drift is so much. So I think that's the way you have to look at the Altaic language. It is, they may have come from the same a group of wandering agriculturalists, but it was so long ago that there's no commonality, there's no understanding, mutual understanding between the two languages.
So did the let's see, the Turkic people and the Indo-Europeans, did they branch off from the Yamnayas like the Huns?
Yes. The Turkic people are descendants of the Altaic people. So that early branch that happened so early, the Turks came down from that far northeast branch that we saw. So formidable were the warriors from the steppes and their horsemanship, that it worked its way into Greek mythology. Now, this Persian aperture, and this is going to be my link when we talk next week about Persian society. The Persian aperture was eventually defended against, not by Cyrus and his dynasty, but by the Parthian, the later dynasty, when they developed the war horse. And these horses are bigger. They have to be, because they're carrying an armored knight. And this was the defense. So a big, strong breed of horse able to carry enough armor to make both horse and rider effectively arrow-proof. Now, we remember from Ramsay's lecture that he talked about China and how they wanted horses from Iran. It was these horses that they wanted. And the advantage was that they could just stand quietly as the little ponies that the Altaic people had would circle around them and shoot them, but they couldn't hurt them because of all their chainmail. And then they'd become exhausted, and then the Persians would charge at the attackers, the steppe raiders. The problem was that they couldn't carry and ride these armored cavalry and catch up with the steppe ponies, who were much faster. The other problem was there wasn't enough pasture for the Iranians, the Persians, to set up feed pastures and open forts in the north. So what happened after the year 500 was a 1,000 year stalemate, which the Russians came along and finally ended. And this is the original Persian horse. This is also the Myceneans followed the Parthians, and they developed even more into something called a cataphracts. I never knew what that meant. It just means armored or enclosed, these big Iranian horses. And then this kind of relates a little bit to what we talked about, Ramsay talked about, the blood-sweating horses of Iran. And I looked a little bit more at that. One of the explanations is in hot temperatures without enough water, the horse will just keep going because they are prey. And of course, humans are the biggest predator. But they'll keep running until they die. And I think we've seen movies where that happens. And the kind of sweat that they can develop can turn pink. So the Han emperors, though, eventually said, well, these big, heavy horses are nice, but they're too expensive. We don't grow that much alfalfa to keep all these horses. So for the same reason that the Persians couldn't take the horses up into the grasslands, the Chinese needed it, the alfalfa, the land, more for human foods. So what they did was the Chinese developed the steppe ponies as well, like the nomads. So you see the difference between those huge Iranian horses and these steppe ponies. And by the late 6th or early 17th century, finally, the stirrup becomes known. This is a great advance, gives more stability to the rider. And the Avars, a steppe tribe, introduced it into Europe along from China. It's a little bit unclear who gets the credit, but the Avars bought it. The Kushans had it theoretically. It's seen in one of their coins, but the Sasanians never developed it. So here you have a heavy, big horse with a heavy rider and no stirrup at all. Finally, it spread around the Mediterranean into Byzantium. So this is the end of the horse story. And so next week, I have a few more things to say about the steppes. And this is where we left off with the steppes. I'll finish that story, and then we'll talk about the Persians. So I can entertain questions.
That was really good. Thank you.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I came in late, but that was fascinating.
Yeah, I'm glad I did the horses. I'd half done it when we did the Mongols, but I knew this would be a good time to go deep on horses.
What kind of horse did Genghis Khan ride then?
Those little ponies.
Little ponies.
And I'll show you next week. I didn't talk about the ponies this week. But in the context of next week, you'll see how strategically and tactically the Mongols used those little ponies. It wasn't just entirely mobility. He had thought out formations, much as the Greeks had figured out how to use the phalanx, the Greek soldiers with their shields, figured out how to do that tactically. Well, the Mongols figured out how to do it with horses, and it's quite something. I'll show you.
A movie that Shigeko and I watched last week, it's called Mongol, The Rise of Genghis Khan. And it was done by a Russian guy. And he got really interested in this. And he wants to make it into a trilogy. He started the second one in 2019 and hasn't finished it. But I got the feeling on watching the first one that Genghis Khan was really a good strategist as well.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, Aiko, this is interesting. And this is so personal, I'm going to stop recording here.